Hero. Any person admired for courage, nobility, or exploits, especially in war. Any person admired for qualities or achievements and regarded as an ideal or model. They rise to the occasion. They meet the challenge. They inspire us. They are heroes. James B. Stockdale, born in 1923 in Abingdon, Illinois. Hanoi, 1966. We knew them as American prisoners of war. But to the North Vietnamese, they were war criminals. Many were tortured, and some died there of malnutrition. But few were treated more harshly than this man. Admiral James Bond Stockdale was a P.O.W. in Hanoi for 7.5 years. Some say he was the most tortured American in captivity. He spent over 4 years in an isolated cell in leg irons, where his captors twisted and broke his already broken leg. Years later, Admiral Stockdale would receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry while in a prison camp. Recognized by his captors as the leader in the prisoners of war resistance to interrogation and in their refusal to participate in propaganda exploitation, Stockdale was singled out for interrogation and attendant torture after he was detected in a covert communications attempt.
From the time I pulled that handle and was in that parachute, I was committed to several things, and coming home alive was one of them.
Stockdale was an only child with limited physical aptitude, but he learned to make up for his small size with sheer force of will.
I said, I am not going to be a sissy, and I am going to make the football team.
At the urging of his father, Stockdale entered the Naval Academy at Annapolis, the class of 1947, where he would once again have to prove himself. One of his classmates was the future president, Jimmy Carter. The yearbook noted that James Earl Carter rarely studied, but was still at the top of his class. Of Stockdale, it said that he worked hard and played hard, adding it would be a lucky man to find himself on the China station with Stock.
In my mind, I was the world's best fighter pilot. I was a man of modern technology. I really loved my work. I'll, in all honesty, say that I preferred to be out there flying combat to anything else.
The Gulf of Tonkin, 1964. Stockdale is assigned as Crusader Squadron Commander on the U.S.S. Ticonderoga. Tensions with the North Vietnamese are at an all-time high. Reports reach the Ticonderoga that North Vietnamese PT boats have attacked a nearby American destroyer. Stockdale's Crusader Squadron goes into action, and Stockdale himself sinks 2 of the enemy vessels. After news of a second PT boat attack, President Johnson orders American planes to bomb bases in North Vietnam. Now there is no turning back.
But let no one doubt for a moment that we have the resources and we have the will to follow this course as long as it may take.
Reporters interviewed the leader of that first retaliatory airstrike, James Bond Stockdale.
Coordination was worked out. I was able to see the planes as we approached the targets, and the attack from a professional aviator's viewpoint could hardly be improved upon.
Within 6 months, America would embark on a bombing strategy of unprecedented magnitude. At its height, Operation Rolling Thunder would involve over 12,000 missions per month, with pilots often flying through intense anti-aircraft fire. Stockdale's next assignment was to the U.S.S. ORISKANY, a key carrier in the Rolling Thunder plan. By now, he had more flying time in the supersonic F-8 than any man in the world. This footage was taken by Stockdale himself on a bombing raid. Stockdale earned the respect of his men by refusing to sit behind a desk when his required number of missions had been met.
We flew the attacker aircraft with us. He was not one to sit back and let somebody else carry the load. He did his share and then some.
Captain Harry Jenkins served under Stockdale on the ORISKANY. He would later share a cell with him in a Hanoi prison camp.
He seemed to have an insight into things that other people didn't have. For example, on our way to Vietnam, he got all the pilots together and he went over the code of conduct with us and made it very plain that if any of us went down or shot down, that the code of conduct would apply.
September 9th, 1965. Stockdale, a little tired, makes final preparations for what was to be an important bombing raid over North Vietnam. In less than 2 hours, his plane would be shot down. He was 41 years old and would spend the rest of his 40s in tiny prison cells, wearing leg irons and enduring the infamous torture rooms of the Hanoi Hilton prison camp. Heroes will be back in a moment. This is Hoa Lo Prison, Vietnamese for fiery furnace, later nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton by the P.O.Ws. James Bond Stockdale spent nearly 8 years in leg irons here. More than 4 years of that time would be in isolation.
It became obvious after a while of living alone that if you didn't want to become an animal, you had to organize your life in some way. Now, this may seem like a strange thing to be in a little bit of a box in a pair of leg irons and to organize one's life, but I learned to do push-ups and leg irons. These were traveling. I did exercises, and of course I had a ritualistic period in the day when I prayed. And that became kind of an obligation.
While Stockdale learned to cope with life in prison, his fellow pilots from the ORISKANY continued Operation Rolling Thunder. Harry Jenkins was flying 2 missions a day until November 13th, 1965, the day his plane was shot down. He, too, was brought to Hoa Lo Prison, where he experienced the same system of torture that awaited all new arrivals.
Well, they tied me up in such a way that my limbs, my arms lost all the blood. My hands were dark, had turned dark. The fingers wouldn't move when I moved them. My legs were in irons weighted to cut my ankles like a pair of scissors. And they just left you to hurt.
After 4 days of brutality, Jenkins finally broke down and gave his captors information about his missions. Only then was he transferred to the main cell block. Racked with guilt over being broken, he discovered that Stockdale was in the next cell.
He was the first person who was able to get in touch with me, contact me after I was thrown in with the group or in a different cell block. And when I told him that I'd been broken and this sort of thing, his words were, "Welcome to the club," which told me so much that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't going to be shut out, that he understood.
It was extremely dangerous for prisoners to actually speak to one another. Instead, Stockdale taught them a tap code that dated back to the Civil War. He used this code to issue orders and direct the actions of the prisoners.
You throw out the letter K, and you've got a 25-letter alphabet. If I put a C where K should be, the guy's going to be able to figure out what I got. A is 1-1. And I know that 4-3 is S. To get practical about it, we had to have a call-up. We soon learned that the best way to call up an American was to give him a very traditional American signal, which is the shave and the haircut. What do you do when you hear that? You rush the wall and you go, 2 bits. So that was natural. So if I were going to talk to the guy at the other end of the building, I could probably raise him by a big thump with the heel of my hand. And if he was alert and it was during a quiet period, I would hear back. If, on the other hand, I had access to the peephole, I could see the shadow under the door, I knew where the guard was, and I wanted to talk surreptitiously and rapidly to the man next door, I might have the convention of using the cup even for that, because we could tap. And then I'd get it back. You know what I just sent him? Hi, H-I. And then he would give, and then I would say, R, the letter R, U, okay.
We would communicate sometimes just for the sake of communicating. When there was a new guy would come in, we'd get his name and so forth and what the war was going on. And we had people who, having run out of other things, would tell us what TV shows were in color, what was no longer on. They'd tell us about movies that we'd missed. Just the ability to communicate was a very, very important thing. And I think without that, had they really been successful in isolating us from each other, many of us would have not survived.
Harry Jenkins almost didn't survive. He was dying of malnutrition when Stockdale and other fellow prisoners went to his aid.
And I had a very severe stomach ache of some sort. And there was no position I could sit in that would ease that pain. And I asked the guards for morphine, and they would give you nothing. And I finally was hurting so badly that I asked them, just shoot me. And in the middle of the night, I wanted some relief or something, and I hollered bow cow for the guard, and no one came. And so the camp, there were 11 of us in this camp, picked this up, and it created quite a stir. Everybody was hollering. And the Admiral took the brunt of this. He was accused of orchestrating this thing, and they removed him from the camp and gave him some pretty harsh treatment.
As senior ranking officer of some 300 American prisoners at the Hanoi Hilton, Stockdale bore the heaviest burden of torture. In one session, his already broken leg was twisted and rebroken by his captors. Today, almost 20 years later, Admiral Stockdale is retired from the Navy, but he remembers the details of his torture sessions as if they happened yesterday.
Their response is to come in, lock you in leg irons, but these have a long bar, they're heavy, and then amid lots of clamor, some slappings to the face, huzzas from a crowd that gathers, 2 torture guards will normally emerge, specially trained men, and start cinching your arms together with the manila rope. And then he climbs on your back, forcing you flat into a V shape, stands on your back, and then gets more leverage as he pulls your shoulders together to the point where you think your shoulders are going to touch, and all the time conscious of the fact that you have numb arms, which if you've done it before, memory tells you will mean that you will not be able to tie your pajama pants for weeks or months, depending upon the amount of minutes these limbs are drained of blood. And then he adds the fillip by taking his heel and pushing your head down between your feet, totally jackknifed, where you start panicking, choking, maybe vomiting because of claustrophobia. At some point along here, with claustrophobia, blood circulation stoppage, and arms distended into unnatural, painful configurations, there comes a time when you submit.
These are North Vietnamese propaganda films. Many prisoners were forced, through torture, to appear in them.
The people who rescued, who captured me, treated me fairly.
Carolyn, I love you. They're treating me well. Merry Christmas, Dick.
You won't see Stockdale in these films because he bloodied his face each time they were to be taken. While he didn't ask the same of his men, he did insist that all prisoners go through a period of resistance before giving in to the demands of their captors. And that usually meant torture.
This was a method of command in which he wasn't setting goals that people could not reach. He understood that all people aren't equal. Some are stronger than others, and he took that into account.
Make them work for it. That is the slogan. Make them hurt you. Never leave that room in that torture situation unless you can say to yourself, I made them earn their pay.
Almost 900 families, wives and families of the missing.
Sybil Stockdale did not know if her husband was alive or dead for over 8 months after he was reported missing. As her husband became the leader of the men in prison, she became the leader of the P.O.W. wives, spearheading a campaign for the release of the captured men.
The first Christmas Eve was really a very, very, very bad time for me after I got all the Christmas Santa Claus presents under the tree. And I reminded myself that no matter whether Jim was here or not, that whatever memories were made were the memories that the boys were going to have of Christmases in the future. So I kind of gave myself a talking to and said, you know, you must treat this like a business, that you're in the business of making memories for little boys, and we're going to do this as well as we possibly can. And that helped a lot.
On rare occasions, prisoners were allowed to exchange letters with their families. Stockdale took advantage of these occasions to reassure his wife and send her his confidence and love. In a 1978 interview, Sybil Stockdale read one of her favorite letters from her husband.
This one was written. My darling, Sib, please know how much I miss and love Stan, Jimmy, Sid, and little fellow Taylor. Also know that I love you most of all. Sib, I pray that you know of my pride in you and of my faith and confidence in your judgment in all matters. Your rearing of our 4 wonderful sons is a magnificent achievement. Tell them of my pride and confidence in them. God bless you all this Christmas season. Love, Jim.
I think another great obligation that I felt I must preserve the flame for was the love of the family. The Sybil's dignity and motherhood and guts and rectitude demanded nothing less. I had to come home in the way that would make my family proud.
In January of 1973, an agreement between the United States and the Republic of North Vietnam was signed. The war was over, and the prisoners were going home. Seen here moments before boarding a plane home, some prisoners are getting their first glimpse of freedom in over 7 years. Prisoners like Harry Jenkins and James Bond Stockdale. San Diego, February 15th, 1973.
They took me right to the microphone. There was no hugging and kissing before the speech. The speech was the thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, Captain James Stockdale. We're so glad to be home. Our thoughts have been with you ever since we left, and they're going to be with you from now on. For just an instant, permit me to let my thoughts turn inward, however. Inward to these wonderful Americans with whom I've been in prison. I'm proud of their performance. We've fought together, we've laughed together, we've cried together, and we've prayed together. Thank you.
After nearly 8 years in captivity, James Bond Stockdale was home. The children he had left were now young men, and the America he lived in had changed. But friends, family, and the United States Navy would soon learn that they hadn't heard the last of this heroic man. Heroes will return in a moment. We now return to heroes. The prisoners were home, and for a while they became the spokesman of post-war heroism in America.
I had a regimen of some 300 push-ups a day, at least in the last couple of years. Harry Jenkins on my left here had the dubious honor of sitting on a bench under which I propped my legs as I did a couple of hundred sit-ups.
I remember just a few weeks before we were allowed to come home, they came in with a sports magazine of some sort, and there's a Green Bay Packer stuffing his hair into his helmet, and this just isn't the way it is, but it was.
The only thing I remember really finding disturbing was the noise level of the country. It seemed like after all these years of silence that there was a lot of unnecessary racket, not only from mechanical conveyances, but particularly from people. I called it the big wide world of yakety-yak.
Stockdale had hoped to get his own ship, but with the damage to his leg, it was not to be. Yet he was named 3-star Admiral and made president of the Naval War College in Maryland.
How good men die.
He took the opportunity to challenge the popular assumption that if you simply act tough enough as a prisoner of war, your captors will give up and leave you alone.
That's not true. There's no way. They are just as energetic and just as determined and just as aggressive against the toughest as the weakest 8 years after you get there.
When he retired from the Navy in 1979, Stockdale was the most decorated member, wearing 26 personal combat medals, including the Congressional Medal of Honor. Today, Stockdale is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. In writing about his Vietnam experience, he deals with a universal human issue, how to persevere through hard times with courage and dignity. This was the central theme of a book that he wrote with his wife Sybil, about how they survived their ordeal. It was later made into a television movie.
We, I think, have had a great experience in living a life without regrets, now that I'm home.
Since his return from Vietnam, Captain Jenkins has retired from the Navy and works with a top defense contractor. He lives with his wife in San Diego, only a few blocks from the Stockdales. Jenkins says that friendship and trust were the keys to survival among fellow prisoners.
People who've been in combat together form some sort of a bond that they would not have formed otherwise, no matter how much they knew of each other or spent with each other, because they've shared, I guess you just lived on the bitter edge together, and you can't talk about it or understand it unless you've been there.
When comradeship ran so high and there was such an affection for each other among us guys who were victims of this thing, I thought to myself, you know, I wouldn't be anywhere else. I'm right where I should be.
Hero, a person admired for courage, nobility, or exploits, especially in war. A person admired for qualities or achievements and regarded as an ideal or model. He rose to the occasion. He met the challenge. He inspired us. He is a hero.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.